how does it feel? And when you desire, how is it different? These are some of the questions that are at the center of my exploration on the nature of erotic desire and its concomitant dilemmas in modern love. So I traveled the globe, and what I'm noticing is that everywhere where romanticism has entered, there seems to be a crisis of desire. A crisis of desire as in owning the wanting. Desire as an expression of our individuality, of our free choice, of our preferences, of our identity. Desire that has become a central concept as part of modern love and individualistic societies. You know, this is the first time in the history of humankind where we are trying to experience sexuality in the long term, not because we want 14 children for which we need to have even more because many of them won't make it, and not because it is exclusively a woman's marital duty. This is the first time that we want sex over time about pleasure and connection that is rooted in desire. So what sustains desire and why is it so difficult? And at the heart of sustaining desire in a committed relationship, I think, is the reconciliation of two fundamental human needs. On the one hand, our need for security, for predictability, for safety, for dependability, for reliability, for permanence, all these anchoring, grounding experiences of our lives that we call home. But we also have an equally strong need, men and women, for adventure, for novelty, for mystery, for risk, for danger, for the unknown, for the unexpected, surprise, you get the gist, for journey, for travel. So reconciling our need for security and our need for adventure into one relationship, or what we today like to call a passionate marriage, used to be a contradiction in terms. Marriage was an economic institution in which you were given a partnership for life in terms of children and social status and succession and companionship. But now we want our partner to still give us all these things, but in addition, I want you to be my best friend and my trusted confidant and my passionate lover to boot, and we live twice as long. So we come to one person, and we basically are asking them to give us what once an entire village used to provide. Give me belonging, give me identity, give me continuity, but give me transcendence and mystery and awe all in one. Give me comfort, give me edge, give me novelty, give me familiarity, give me predictability, give me surprise. And we think it's a given, and toys and lingerie are going to save us with that. So now we get to the existential reality of this story, right? Because I think in some way, and I'll come back to that, but the crisis of desire is often a crisis of the imagination. So why does good sex so often fade? What is the relationship between love and desire? How do they relate and how do they conflict? Because therein lies the mystery of eroticism. So if there is a verb for me that comes with love, it's to have. And if there is a verb that comes with desire, it is to want. In love, we want to have. We want to know the beloved. We want to minimize the distance. We want to contract that gap. We want to neutralize the tensions. We want closeness. But in desire, we tend to not really want to go back to the places we've already gone. Foregone conclusion does not keep our interest. In desire, we want an other, somebody on the other side that we can go visit, that we can go spend some time with, that we can go see what goes on in their red light district. You know? In desire, we want a bridge to cross. Or in other words, I sometimes say, fire needs air. Desire needs a space. And when it's said like that, it's often quite abstract. But then I took a question with me, and I've gone to more than 20 countries in the last few years with Mating in Captivity. And I ask people, when do you find yourself most drawn to your partner? Not attracted sexually per se, but most drawn. And across culture, across religion, and across gender, except for one, there are a few answers that just keep coming back. So the first group is, I am most drawn to my partner when she's away. when we are apart, when we reunite. Basically, when I get back in touch with my ability to imagine myself with my partner, when my imagination comes back in the picture, and when I can root it in absence and in longing, which is a major component of desire. But then the second group is even more interesting. I am most drawn to my partner when I see him in the studio, when she's on stage, when he's in his element, when she's doing something she's passionate about, when I see him at a party and other people are really drawn to him, when I see her hold court. Basically, when I look at my partner, radiant and confident, probably the biggest turn on across the board. Radiant as in self-sustaining. I look at this person. By the way, in desire, people rarely talk about it when we are blended into 5 centimeters from each other. I don't know in inches how much that is. But it's also not when the other person is that far apart that you no longer see them. It's when I'm looking at my partner from a comfortable distance, where this person that is already so familiar, so known, is momentarily once again somewhat mysterious, somewhat elusive. And in this space between me and the other lies the erotic élan, lies that movement toward the other. Because sometimes, as Proust says, mystery is not about traveling to new places, but it's about looking with new eyes. And so when I see my partner on his own or her own doing something in which they are enveloped, I look at this person and I momentarily get a shift in perception, and I stay open to the mysteries that are living right next to me. And then, more importantly, in this description about the other, or myself, it's the same. What is most interesting is that there is no neediness in desire. Nobody needs anybody. There is no caretaking in desire. Caretaking is mightily loving. It's a powerful anti-aphrodisiac. I have yet to see somebody who is so turned on by somebody who needs them. Wanting them is one thing. Needing them is a shutdown, and women have known that forever, because anything that will bring up parenthood will usually decrease the erotic charge. For good reasons, right? And then the third group of answers usually would be when I'm surprised, when we laugh together, as somebody said to me in the office today, when he's in his tux. So I said, you know, it's either the tux or the cowboy boots. You know, but basically it's when there is novelty. But novelty isn't about new positions. It isn't a repertoire of techniques. Novelty is, what parts of you do you bring out? What parts of you are just being seen? Because in some way one could say, sex isn't something you do, huh? Sex is a place you go. It's a space you enter, inside yourself and with another or others. So where do you go in sex? What parts of you do you connect to? What do you seek to express there? Is it a place for transcendence and spiritual union? Is it a place for naughtiness? And is it a place to be safely aggressive? Is it a place where you can finally surrender and not have to take responsibility for everything? Is it a place where you can express your infantile wishes? What comes out there? It's a language. It isn't just a behavior. And it's a poetic of that language that I'm interested in, which is why I began to explore this concept of erotic intelligence. You know, animals have sex. It's the pivot, it's biology, it's the natural instinct. We are the only ones who have an erotic life, which means that it's sexuality transformed by the human imagination. We are the only ones who can make love for hours, have a blissful time, multiple orgasms, and touch nobody, just because we can imagine it. We can hint at it, we don't even have to do it. We can experience that powerful thing called anticipation, which is a mortar to desire. The ability to imagine it as if it's happening, to experience it as if it's happening, while nothing is happening and everything is happening at the same time. So when I began to think about eroticism, I began to think about the poetics of sex. And if I look at it as an intelligence, then it's something that you cultivate. What are the ingredients? Imagination, playfulness, novelty, curiosity, mystery. But the central agent is really that piece called the imagination. But more importantly, for me to begin to understand who are the couples who have an erotic spark, what sustains desire, I had to go back to the original definition of eroticism, the mystical definition. And I went through it through a bifurcation by looking actually at trauma, which is the other side. And I looked at it looking at the community that I had grown up in, which was a community in Belgium, all Holocaust survivors. And in my community, there were two groups, those who didn't die and those who came back to life. And those who didn't die lived often very tethered to the ground, could not experience pleasure, could not trust, because when you're vigilant, worried, anxious, and insecure, you can't lift your head to go and take off in space and be playful and safe and imaginative. Those who came back to life were those who understood the erotic as an antidote to death. They knew how to keep themselves alive. And when I began to listen to the sexlessness of the couples that I work with, I sometimes would hear people say, I want more sex. But generally, people want better sex. And better is to reconnect with that quality of aliveness, of vibrancy, of renewal, of vitality, of eros, of energy that sex used to afford them or that they've hoped it would afford them. And so I began to ask a different question. I shut myself off when began to be the question. I turn off my desires when, which is not the same question as what turns me off is, and you turn me off when. And people began to say, I turn myself off when I feel dead inside, when I don't like my body, when I feel old, when I haven't had time for myself, when I haven't had a chance to even check in with you, when I don't perform when at work, when I feel low self-esteem, when I don't have a sense of self-worth, when I don't feel like I have the right to want, to take, to receive pleasure. And then I began to ask the reverse question. I turn myself on when? Because most of the time people like to ask the question, you turn me on, what turns me on, and I'm out of the question. You know? Now, if you are dead inside, the other person can do a lot of things for Valentine. It won't make a dent. There is nobody at the reception desk. You know? So I turn myself on when? I turn my desires. I wake up when? You know? Now, in this paradox between love and desire, what seems to be so puzzling is that the very ingredients that nurture love, mutuality, reciprocity, protection, worry, responsibility for the other, are sometimes the very ingredients that stifle desire. Because desire comes with a host of feelings that are not always so favorites of love. Jealousy, possessiveness, aggression, power, dominance, naughtiness, mischief. Basically, most of us, you know, will get turned on at night by the very same things that we will demonstrate against during the day. You know, the erotic mind is not very politically correct. If everybody was fantasizing on a bed of roses, we wouldn't be having such interesting talks about this. You know, but no, in our mind up there are a host of things going on that we don't always know how to bring to the person that we love, because we think love comes with selflessness, and in fact desire comes with a certain amount of selfishness in the best sense of the word, the ability to stay connected to oneself in the presence of another. So I want to draw that little image for you, because this need to reconcile these two sets of needs, we are born with that. Our need for connection, our need for separateness, or our need for security and adventure, or our need for togetherness and for autonomy. And if you think about the little kid who sits on your lap and who is cozily nested here and very secure and comfortable, and at some point all of us need to go out into the world to discover and to explore. That's the beginning of desire. That next exploratory needs, curiosity, discovery. And then at some point they turn around and they look at you. And if you tell them, hey kiddo, the world's a great place, go for it, there's so much fun out there, then they can turn away and they can experience connection and separateness at the same time. They can go off in their imagination, off in their body, off in their playfulness, all the while knowing that there's somebody when they come back to. But if on this side there is somebody who says, I'm worried, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, my partner hasn't taken care of me in so long, what's so good out there? Don't we have everything you need together, you and I? Then there are a few little reactions that all of us can pretty much recognize. Some of us will come back, came back a long time ago. And that little child who comes back is the child who will forgo a part of himself in order not to lose the other. I will lose my freedom in order not to lose connection. And I will learn to love in a certain way that will become burdened with extra worry and extra responsibility and extra protection. And I won't know how to leave you in order to go play, in order to go experience pleasure, in order to discover, to enter inside myself. Translate this into adult language. It starts very young, it continues into our sex lives up to the end. Child number 2 comes back but looks like that over their shoulder all the time. You know, are you going to be there? You're going to curse me? You're going to scold me? You're going to be angry with me? And they may be gone, but they're never really away. And those are often the people that will tell you in the beginning it was super hot. Because in the beginning, the growing intimacy wasn't yet so strong that it actually led to the decrease of desire. The more connected I became, the more responsible I felt, the less I was able to let go in your presence. The third child doesn't really come back. So what happens if you want to sustain desire, it's that real dialectic piece. On the one hand, you want the security in order to be able to go. On the other hand, if you can't go, you can't have pleasure, you can't culminate, you don't have an orgasm, you don't get excited because you spend your time in the body and the head of the other and not in your own. So in this dilemma about reconciling these two sets of fundamental needs, there are a few things that I've come to understand erotic couples do. One, they have a lot of sexual privacy. They understand that there is an erotic space that belongs to each of them. They also understand that foreplay is not something you do 5 minutes before the real thing. Foreplay pretty much starts at the end of the previous orgasm. They also understand that an erotic space isn't about you begin to stroke the other. It's about you create a space where you leave Management Inc., maybe where you leave the Agile program, and you actually just enter that place where you stop being the good citizen who is taking care of things and being responsible. Responsibility and desire just butt heads. They don't really do well together. Erotic couples also understand that passion waxes and wanes. It's pretty much like the moon. It has intermittent eclipses. But what they know is they know how to resurrect it. They know how to bring it back. And they know how to bring it back because they have demystified one big myth, which is the myth of spontaneity, which is that it's just going to fall from heaven while you're folding the laundry like a deus ex machina. And in fact, they understood that whatever is going to just happen in a long-term relationship already has. Committed sex is premeditated sex. It's willful, it's intentional, it's focus and presence. Merry Valentine.
All right.
All right.
So today we're going to be reacting to oversimplified World War I.
For people that don't know the whole story,
What do you know about World War I? We did World
I
War
don't
II
know the whole
and Hitler.
story. That's why I'm watching this.
All I know is that it started by one guy. One guy died.
That is a discrepancy.
Okay.
No one knows. It's
Well,
just, you know,
Well, I think we do.
it's just a million different things. So it's good to watch this so you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. 'Cause I always look back, I just think, they're just fighting for no reason. But there's because of how it was. World War II, you were fighting evil. In World War I, it was like each country was really prideful and wanted to just be the best. So it's kind of like almost like a sport. Almost, it felt like they just wanted to be the best. Look, we're winning. So I'm not so sure. I know one guy died. The one guy died, and that whole thing happened. I just got to be refreshed. But
What do you mean one guy died?
the prince of I forgot the name. They're going to say it. He gets assassinated by a guy, and then they associate it with another country. They go to war. That country's associated with another country, so they go to war too, and then it's just a whole snowball effect. At least as far as I remember, but we'll see it from here. All right, you ready?
Peace.
What?
Oh, go ahead.
Let's do it.
The world of 1914, a time of modern technology, culture, and fashion. Truly the height of civilization.
What?
Looks like
Let's
it's
He's
his
an
leg.
ostrich? Yo,
Everyone
looked like
knew
it was
that
his
war was
legs.
coming. France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it. Germany wanted to take more of everyone's stuff, and they were building a big sexy navy that was making the British uncomfortable. The These two empires thought they were really cool, but lots of different people who lived there didn't think it was so cool. And some of them had even been declaring independence with help from Russia. Everyone was talking about each other behind each other's backs, throwing the fact that military technology had come a long way since the last major war, and suddenly everyone was pretty eager to beat each other up. In this area of Austria-Hungary lived some Serbs and Bosnians who hated living in Austria-Hungary. So the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes there for a nice drive in an open-top car with his car's route published in advance. And that went just about
7
as well
essential
as
tips
you'd
for
expect.
assassinating world leaders.
Some assassins were waiting for him along the way and threw bombs at his car, but they missed and blew up some officers behind him instead. So the Archduke goes into hiding, leaves Sarajevo, and the whole war never happens. Except no, the Archduke doesn't leave, but instead goes back out in the
To an alley?
open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital. The driver takes a wrong turn and by sheer coincidence gets stuck beside one of the veiled assassins, who shoots him. Austria-Hungary is
One guy.
understandably pissed about all this, and they think the Serbian government had something to do with it, which they might have. So they go to their ally Germany and say, "Hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia," and Germany is all for that. So Austria-Hungary send a big list of impossible demands to Serbia, and when Serbia refuses, they declare war. Austria-Hungary and Germany are friends, and Serbia is protected by Russia, who's friends with France, so they'll declare war on each other. Montenegro joins in too. France and Britain also have a kind of alliance.
I'm already
so when
confused.
France
See,
says,
they all
"Hey, Britain,
friends.
you
That's
got
what
my back?"
happens. They're all friends.
Britain
One guy
is
does
like,
this. One guy does this.
Maybe. And then they decide to stay out of it, which is great for Germany, because Germany has a plan. They know that Russia is so big and clumsy that it will take them a while to get ready for war. So with this guy in charge, Germany will send all its troops into France at lightning speed while Russia's getting ready, defeat France, then move all the troops to Russia and defeat Russia, and then we all speak German and eat Pfefferpottast every day. Just one problem. France has loads of forts and defenses along its German border, and Germany can't waste any time fighting them, so Germany decides to go around them. Through Belgium.
See, this is how they first started doing the whole
Belgium
France
is
thing,
neutral,
even before
but
World
Germany
War
wants
II.
to march 750,000 troops through it to get around France's defenses. They're hoping Belgium will just
Not
kind
even
of
going
sit
against
down
France
and
in the
shut
first
up,
place.
but they
Exactly.
don't. They fight back, and they're pretty good too, so they slow the Germans down. What's worse is that Britain shows up, and they're
Germans
pretty
always
pissed
wanted
that
to
Germany's
fight, see?
invading neutral countries. So now Britain
That's the
declares war
problem.
on Germany.
I thought it was Austria and then
So
Germany.
Germany
joined.
push on through Belgium and commit some atrocities along the way. They also wear spikes and
No,
sometimes
Germany
skulls on
joined
their
in
uniform.
when they didn't have
Does
to.
not look like the bad guys. Good job. The Allies have a propaganda extravaganza, and this starts having an influence around the world, notably in America. The US President Woodrow Wilson sees himself as a bit of a Jesus figure, and spends most of the war trying to get everyone to just hug it out. But there's also a large population of ethnic Germans living in the United States, and when the war first broke out, they were like, "Yay, Germany!" But now that they're committing atrocities in Belgium, they're less enthusiastic.
So we were like,
Let's
"Yay,
play.
Germany!
Spot
We're
the
rooting
French
for Germany."
Oh, the
Did you see
Germans
him?
were.
Easy, right?
They were
He's
that
wearing
way
a
in
white
the
blue
United
uniform with
States.
red trousers. And do you know who else spotted him easily too? The Germans. So when the French were slowly marching in columns through the countryside, the Germans easily tore them to shreds with their giant guns.
'Cause they were
All the
wearing
nations
white-
involved in this war
bright
went
red
in with
pants.
an old school war mentality, and all of them had to update their uniforms and tactics a lot during the Great War. Because this war was going to be like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Russia's ready for war, and way earlier than expected.
Yep.
Hey, Austria-Hungary, can you get on top of that? Oh yeah, sure, we've got this. Nope. So Germany has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. We've got this. Nope. So Germany has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. The chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army is this guy, and although he is handsome, he turns out not to be the best military strategist. Austria-Hungary constantly ignores Germany's advice, and then comes running back to Germany whenever they get in trouble. Austria-Hungary even gets its ass kicked by tiny Serbia, who repels all their invasion attempts at the start of the war. It's better news for Germany in the north, though, where they almost completely wipe out the Russian Second Army. Back on the western front,
Germany's
the
doing
Germans
better.
continue advancing and are in sight of Paris. At this point, anyone would be forgiven for thinking the Germans were going to get that quick victory after all. But then things start to go wrong. The French commander-in-chief knew something had to be done, and he ordered his armies to stop retreating. In the resulting battle, a gap opened up in the German lines. If a gap opens up, the enemy can use it to flank you from the side and behind, so the German armies have to retreat. The Allies launch a counterattack, so the Germans dig into defensive positions. The
Here
Allies
we
do
go.
the same.
Trenches.
Then both sides move north, trying to outflank each other along the way. When they reach the sea, they're in a stalemate with trench systems running the whole way from the coast to Switzerland, the beginning of trench warfare on the Western Front. Here's how trench warfare works. Two opposing lines of trenches with no man's land in between. One side would pummel the other with hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, sometimes for days at a time. This had a huge psychological effect on the soldiers, leaving many shell-shocked. Then,
I'd
the
be,
attacking
gosh,
troops
imagine
would leave their
constantly
trenches
bombarded.
and rush
Can't
across
hear
no
anything
man's
either.
land. A muddy, wet mass of shell craters and barbed wire. The defending trench would unleash machine gun fire on the attackers, inflicting thousands of casualties. The attackers would send wave after wave until either they gave up or the opposing trench was finally overrun. There would be months of fighting and the deaths of thousands in order to gain a few meters or kilometers of land. Living in the trenches was hard work too. Corpses,
Yeah, but,
mud
you
that
know,
could
that's
swallow
what
you
you do,
whole,
unfortunately.
pools of poisonous water, rats, disease, the smell. It's insane that millions of soldiers put up with these conditions and commanders ordered them to do so for years.
Wow.
They're so
It
fun.
accomplished nothing.
So from the beginning, like I said, it just looks like people are just going
It's
to
like
war,
Germany. It looks like Germany. They asked Germany to
help out Austria.
help out, and they said, "Yeah, no problem." Well, that's what happens when
And
you
then
nose
snowballs
around.
down.
Now look where you are.
And everybody helps out. All the other countries that are being attacked.
Yeah,
And that's the
know.
whole snowball effect. Now everyone's just fighting, but for what cause? Just because everyone was angry at each other in the beginning? One
Yep.
guy dies. So I still don't get it. I might have to do more research, but it still just looks like I still
Well, if
don't
you
understand the
killed-
real purpose.
If you killed President, say Trump, on another prop, of course we'd go after him. We'd pull everyone together.
Yeah, I guess
So you got to look at it that way. That's how it was back
Yeah.
then. You know what I mean?
that's the main purpose.
I mean,
Just
you
as
killed the prince or whatever he
the
was.
prince.
Someone's going to go after him. You can't
Yeah.
just not do anything and say, okay. You know, they should have been protecting him. If he
But
was
I think
in
they were
another
really
country.
too eager to go to war. Like, yeah, sure, we'll help out because we're
Yeah, but
strong.
that's
a
kind
nation.
of a- but-
and then everybody else is eager too to join in. 'cause
Somebody
they just wanna-
kills your leader. You know, you're definitely going to go to
It
war.
sucks that I had to start all this unnecessary death.
Yeah, it is what it is, though. Happens. It happens.
All right, if you guys want to see part 2, make sure you go down, let us know in the comments, and leave a like on the video, and we'll see you in the next one.
Peace.
Peace. All right.
All right.
So today we're going to be reacting to Hitler Oversimplified. We already did World War II Oversimplified, which gave us a greater in-depth look
she's 4,000 years ago, the ancient Sumerians made a surprising discovery. If they scraped the bark off a particular kind of tree and ate it, their pain disappeared. Little did they know that what they'd found was destined to influence the future course of medicine. What the Sumerians had discovered was a precursor to the medicine known today as aspirin. Aspirin's active ingredient is found commonly in willow trees and other wild plants, which is how it came to infuse the medical traditions of Sumer, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and other cultures. Around 400 BC, Hippocrates, thought of as the father of modern medicine, first recommended chewing willow bark for pain relief and making willow leaf tea to ease the pain of childbirth. But it took over 2,000 years for us to comprehensively investigate its potential. In the mid-18th century, an Englishman named Edward Stone ran 5 years of experiments showing that willow bark crushed into a powder and eaten could cure a fever. It took nearly another 70 years for a German pharmacist showing that an Englishman named Edward Stone ran 5 years of experiments showing that willow bark crushed into a powder and eaten could cure a fever. It took nearly another 70 years for a German pharmacist, Johann Buchner, to finally identify and purify the substance that made all this possible, a compound called salicin. By then, doctors were routinely using willow bark and other salicin-rich plants, like the herb meadowsweet, to ease pain, fever, and inflammation. But identifying the exact compound suddenly opened up the possibility of manipulating its form. In 1853, a French chemist managed to chemically synthesize the compound, creating a substance called acetyl salicylic acid. Then, in 1897, the pharmaceutical company Bayer found a new method and began marketing the compound as a pain reliever called aspirin. This was widely recognized as one of the first synthetic pharmaceutical drugs. Originally, aspirin was just Bayer's brand name, A for acetyl, and spur for meadowsweet, whose botanical name is Spirea ulmaria. Soon, aspirin became synonymous with acetyl salicylic acid. As its influence grew, aspirin was found to ease not just pain, but also many inflammation-related problems, like rheumatoid arthritis, pericarditis, which inflames the fluid-filled sac around the heart, and Kawasaki disease, where blood vessels become inflamed. Yet, despite aspirin's medical value, at this point scientists still didn't actually know how it worked. In the 1960s and 70s, Swedish and British scientists changed that. They showed that the drug interrupts the production of certain chemicals called prostaglandins, which control the transmission of pain sensations and inflammation. In 1982, that discovery won the researchers a Nobel Prize in medicine. Over time, research has also uncovered aspirin's risks. Overconsumption can cause bleeding in the intestines and the brain. It can also trigger Ray's syndrome, a rare but often fatal illness that affects the brain and liver in children with an infection. And in the late 20th century, aspirin's success had been overshadowed by newer painkillers with fewer side effects, like acetaminophen and ibuprofen. But in the 1980s, further discoveries about aspirin's benefits revived interest in it. In fact, the 1982 Nobel Prize winners also demonstrated that aspirin slows production of thromboxanes, chemicals that cause clumping of platelets, which in turn form blood clots. A landmark clinical trial showed that aspirin reduced heart attack risk by 44% in participants who took the drug. Today, we prescribe it to people at risk of heart attack or stroke because it cuts the likelihood of clots forming in the arteries that supply the heart and brain. Even more intriguingly, there's a growing body of research that suggests aspirin reduces the risk of getting and dying from cancer, especially colorectal cancer. This might be due to aspirin's anti-platelet effects. By reducing platelet activity, aspirin may decrease the levels of a certain protein that helps cancer cells spread. These discoveries have transformed aspirin from a mere pain reliever to a potentially life-saving treatment. Today, we consume about 100 billion aspirin tablets each year, and researchers continue searching for new applications. Already, aspirin's versatility has transformed modern medicine, which is astounding considering its humble beginnings in a scraping of willow bark. TED-Ed is a nonprofit. If you value our work, please consider supporting it on patreon.com/TEDEd. This chimpanzee stumbles across a windfall of overripe plums. Many of them have split open, drawing him to their intoxicating fruity odor. He gorges himself and begins to experience some strange effects. This unwitting ape has stumbled on a process that humans will eventually harness to create beer, wine, and other alcoholic drinks. The sugars in overripe fruit attract microscopic organisms known as yeasts. As the yeasts feed on the fruit sugars, they produce a compound called ethanol, the type of alcohol in alcoholic beverages. This process is called fermentation. Nobody knows exactly when humans began to create fermented beverages. The earliest known evidence comes from 7000 BCE in China, where residue in clay pots has revealed that people were making an alcoholic beverage from fermented rice, millet, grapes, and honey. Within a few thousand years, cultures all over the world were fermenting their own drinks. Ancient Mesopotamians and Egyptians made beer throughout the year from stored cereal grains. This beer was available to all social classes, and workers even received it in their daily rations. They also made wine, but because the climate wasn't ideal for growing grapes, it was a rare and expensive delicacy. By contrast, in Greece and Rome, where grapes grew more easily, wine was as readily available as beer was in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Because yeasts will ferment basically any plant sugars, ancient peoples made alcohol from whatever crops and plants grew where they lived. In South America, people made chicha from grains, sometimes adding hallucinogenic herbs. In what's now Mexico, pulque, made from cactus sap, was the drink of choice, while East Africans made banana and palm beer. And in the area that's now Japan, people made sake from rice. Almost every region of the globe had its own fermented drinks. As alcohol consumption became part of everyday life, some authorities latched onto effects they perceived as positive. Greek physicians considered wine to be good for health, and poets testified to its creative qualities. Others were more concerned about alcohol's potential for abuse. Greek philosophers promoted temperance. Early Jewish and Christian writers in Europe integrated wine into rituals, but considered excessive intoxication a sin. And in the Middle East, Africa, and Spain, an Islamic rule against praying while drunk gradually solidified into a general ban on alcohol. Ancient fermented beverages had relatively low alcohol content, at about 13% alcohol. The byproducts wild yeasts generate during fermentation become toxic and kill them. When the yeasts die, fermentation stops and the alcohol content levels off. So for thousands of years, alcohol content was limited. That changed with the invention of a process called distillation. 9th century Arabic writings describe boiling fermented liquids to vaporize the alcohol in them. Alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water, so it vaporizes first. Capture this vapor, cool it down, and what's left is liquid alcohol much more concentrated than any fermented beverage. At first, these stronger spirits were used for medicinal purposes. Then, spirits became an important trade commodity because unlike beer and wine, they didn't spoil. Rum made from sugar harvested in European colonies in the Caribbean became a staple for sailors and was traded to North America. Europeans brought brandy and gin to Africa and traded it for enslaved people, land, and goods like palm oil and rubber. Spirits became a form of money in these regions. During the Age of Exploration, spirits played a crucial role in long-distance sea voyages. Sailing from Europe to East Asia and the Americas could take months, and keeping water fresh for the crews was a challenge. Adding a bucket of brandy to a water barrel kept water fresh longer because alcohol is a preservative that kills harmful microbes. So by the 1600s, alcohol had gone from simply giving animals a buzz to fueling global trade and exploration, along with all their consequences. As time went on, its role in human society would only get more complicated. Tracing the history of our industry and agriculture gives us a fascinating look at what we value as a species and how we've ended up where we are today. Check out these two lessons. Deal about chocolate today, the Mesoamericans had us beat. They believed that cacao was a heavenly food gifted to humans by a feathered serpent. If you can't imagine life without chocolate, you're lucky you weren't born before the 16th century. Until then, chocolate only existed in Mesoamerica, in a form quite different from what we know. As far back as 1900 BCE, the people of that region had learned to prepare the beans of the native cacao tree. The earliest records tell us the beans were ground and mixed with cornmeal and chili peppers to create a drink, not a relaxing cup of hot cocoa, but a bitter, invigorating concoction, frothing with foam. And if you thought we make a big deal about chocolate today, the Mesoamericans had us beat. They believed that cacao was a heavenly food gifted to humans by a feathered serpent god, known to the Maya as Kukulkan and to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl. Aztecs used cacao beans as currency and drank chocolate at royal feasts, gave it to soldiers as a reward for success in battle, and used it in rituals. The first transatlantic chocolate encounter occurred in 1519, when Hernán Cortés visited the court of Montezuma at Tenochtitlan. As recorded by Cortés' lieutenant, the king had 50 jugs of the drink brought out and poured into golden cups. When the colonists returned with shipments of the strange new bean, missionaries' salacious accounts of native customs gave it a reputation as an aphrodisiac. At first, its bitter taste made it suitable as a medicine for ailments like upset stomachs. But sweetening it with honey, sugar, or vanilla quickly made chocolate a popular delicacy in the Spanish court. And soon, no aristocratic home was complete without dedicated chocolateware. The fashionable drink was difficult and time-consuming to produce on a large scale. That involved using plantations and imported slave labor in the Caribbean and on islands off the coast of Africa. The world of chocolate would change forever in 1828 with the introduction of the cocoa press by Conrad van Houten of Amsterdam. Van Houten's invention could separate the cocoa's natural fat, or cocoa butter. This left a powder that could be mixed into a drinkable solution or recombined with the cocoa butter to create the solid chocolate we know today. Not long after, a Swiss chocolatier named Daniel Peter added powdered milk to the mix, thus inventing milk chocolate. By the 20th century, chocolate was no longer an elite luxury, but had become a treat for the public. Meeting the massive demand required more cultivation of cocoa, which can only grow near the equator. Now, instead of African slaves being shipped to South American cocoa plantations, cocoa production itself would shift to West Africa, with Côte d'Ivoire providing 2/5 of the world's cocoa as of 2015. Yet, along with the growth of the industry, there have been horrific abuses of human rights. Many of the plantations throughout West Africa, which supply Western companies, use slave and child labor, with an estimation of more than 2 million children affected. This is a complex problem that persists despite efforts from major chocolate companies to partner with African nations to reduce child and indentured labor practices. Today, chocolate has established itself in the rituals of our modern culture. Due to its colonial association with native cultures, combined with the power of advertising, chocolate retains an aura of something sensual, decadent, and forbidden. Yet knowing more about its fascinating and often cruel history, as well as its production today, tells us where these associations originate and what they hide. So as you unwrap your next bar of chocolate, take a moment to consider that not everything about chocolate is sweet. Baked or fried, boiled or roasted, as chips or fries. At some point in your life, you've probably eaten a potato. Delicious for sure, but the fact is, potatoes have played a much more significant role in our history than just that of the dietary staple we have come to know and love today. Without the potato, our modern civilization might not exist at all. 8,000 years ago in South America, high atop the Andes, ancient Peruvians were the first to cultivate the potato. Containing high levels of proteins and carbohydrates, as well as essential fats, vitamins, and minerals, potatoes were the perfect food source to fuel a large Incan working class as they built and farmed their terraced fields, mined the Rocky Mountains, and created the sophisticated civilization of the great Incan Empire. But considering how vital they were to the Incan people, when Spanish sailors returning from the Andes first brought potatoes to Europe, the spuds were duds. Europeans simply didn't want to eat what they considered dull and tasteless oddities from a strange new land, too closely related to the deadly nightshade plant, belladonna, for comfort. So instead of consuming them, they used potatoes as decorative garden plants. More than 200 years would pass before the potato caught on as a major food source throughout Europe, though even then it was predominantly eaten by the lower classes. However, beginning around 1750, and thanks at least in part to the wide availability of inexpensive and nutritious potatoes, European peasants with greater food security no longer found themselves at the mercy of the regularly occurring grain famines of the time, and so their population steadily grew. As a result, the British, Dutch, and German empires rose on the backs of the growing groups of farmers, laborers, and soldiers, thus lifting the West to its place of world dominion. However, not all European countries sprouted empires. After the Irish adopted the potato, their population dramatically increased, as did their dependence on the tuber as a major food staple. But then disaster struck. From 1845 to 1852, potato blight disease ravaged the majority of Ireland's potato crop, leading to the Irish potato famine, one of the deadliest famines in world history. Over 1 million Irish citizens starved to death, and 2 million more left their homes behind. But of course, this wasn't the end for the potato. The crop eventually recovered, and Europe's population, especially the working classes, continued to increase. Aided by the influx of Irish migrants, Europe now had a large, sustainable, and well-fed population who were capable of manning the emerging factories that would bring about our modern world via the Industrial Revolution. So it's almost impossible to imagine a world without the potato. Would the Industrial Revolution ever have happened? Would World War II have been lost by the Allies without this easy-to-grow crop that fed the Allied troops? Would it even have started? When you think about it like this, many major milestones in world history can all be at least partially attributed to the simple spud from the Peruvian hilltops. Before empires and royalty, before pottery and writing, before metal tools and weapons, there was cheese. As early as 8000 BCE, the earliest Neolithic farmers living in the Fertile Crescent began a legacy of cheese-making, almost as old as civilization itself. The rise of agriculture led to domesticated sheep and goats, which ancient farmers harvested for milk. But when left in warm conditions for several hours, that fresh milk began to sour. Its lactic acids caused proteins to coagulate, binding into soft clumps. Upon discovering this strange transformation, the farmers drained the remaining liquid, later named whey, and found the yellowish globs could be eaten fresh as a soft, spreadable meal. These clumps, or curds, became the building blocks of cheese, which would eventually be aged, pressed, ripened, and whizzed into a diverse cornucopia of dairy delights. The discovery of cheese gave Neolithic people an enormous survival advantage. Milk was rich with essential proteins, fats, and minerals, but it also contained high quantities of lactose, a sugar which is difficult to process for many ancient and modern stomachs. Cheese, however, could provide all of milk's advantages with much less lactose, and since it could be preserved and stockpiled, these essential nutrients could be eaten throughout scarce famines and long winters. Some 7th millennium BCE pottery fragments found in Turkey still contain telltale residues of the cheese and butter they held. By the end of the Bronze Age, cheese was a standard commodity in maritime trade throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. In the densely populated city-states of Mesopotamia, cheese became a staple of culinary and religious life. Some of the earliest known writing includes administrative records of cheese quotas, listing a variety of cheeses for different rituals and populations across Mesopotamia. Records from nearby civilizations in Turkey also reference rennet. This animal byproduct, produced in the stomachs of certain mammals, can accelerate and control coagulation. Eventually, this sophisticated cheese-making tool spread around the globe, giving way to a wide variety of new, harder cheeses. And though some conservative food cultures rejected the dairy delicacy, many more embraced cheese and quickly added their own local flavors. Nomadic Mongolians used yak's milk to create hard, sun-dried wedges of buaslag. Egyptians enjoyed goat's milk cottage cheese, straining the whey with reed mats. In South Asia, milk was coagulated with a variety of food acids, such as lemon juice, vinegar, or yogurt, and then hung to dry into loaves of paneer. This soft, mild cheese could be added to curries and sauces, or simply fried as a quick vegetarian dish. The Greeks produced bricks of salty, brined feta cheese, alongside a harder variety similar to today's Pecorino Romano. This grating cheese was produced in Sicily and used in dishes all across the Mediterranean. Under Roman rule, dry cheese, or Caseus aridus, became an essential ration for the nearly 500,000 soldiers guarding the vast borders of the Roman Empire. And when the Western Roman Empire collapsed, cheese-making continued to evolve in the manners that dotted the medieval European countryside. In the hundreds of Benedictine monasteries scattered across Europe, medieval monks experimented endlessly with different types of milk, cheese-making practices, and aging processes that led to many of today's popular cheeses. Parmesan, Roquefort, Munster, and several Swiss types were all refined and perfected by these cheese-making clergymen. In the Alps, Swiss cheese-making was particularly successful, producing a myriad of cow's milk cheeses. By the end of the 14th century, Alpine cheese from the Gruyere region of Switzerland had become so profitable that a neighboring state invaded the Gruyere highlands to take control of the growing cheese trade. Cheese remained popular through the Renaissance, and the Industrial Revolution took production out of the monastery and into machinery. Today, the world produces roughly 22 billion kilograms of cheese a year, shipped and consumed around the globe. But 10,000 years after its invention, local farms are still following in the footsteps of their Neolithic ancestors, handcrafting one of humanity's oldest and favorite foods. Find out how Swiss cheese gets its holes by watching this episode, or trace the fascinating and often cruel history of chocolate with this episode.
During a long day spent roaming the forest in search of edible grains and herbs, the weary divine farmer, Shen Nong, accidentally poisoned himself 72 times. But before the poisons could end his life, a leaf drifted into his mouth. He chewed on it, and it revived him. And that is how we discovered tea. Or so an ancient legend goes, at least. Tea doesn't actually cure poisonings, but the story of Shen Nong, the mythical Chinese inventor of agriculture, highlights tea's importance to ancient China. Archaeological evidence suggests tea was first cultivated there as early as 6,000 years ago, or 1,500 years before the pharaohs built the Great Pyramids of Giza. That original Chinese tea plant is the same type that's grown around the world today, yet it was originally consumed very differently. It was eaten as a vegetable or cooked with grain porridge. Tea only shifted from food to drink 1,500 years ago, when people realized that a combination of heat and moisture could create a complex and varied taste out of the leafy green. After hundreds of years of variations to the preparation method, the standard became to heat tea, pack it into portable cakes, grind it into powder, mix with hot water, and create a beverage called mo cha, or matcha. Matcha became so popular that a distinct Chinese tea culture emerged. Tea was the subject of books and poetry, the favorite drink of emperors, and a medium for artists. They would draw extravagant pictures in the foam of the tea, very much like the espresso art you might see in coffee shops today. In the 9th century, during the Tang Dynasty, a Japanese monk brought the first tea plant to Japan. The Japanese eventually developed their own unique rituals around tea, leading to the creation of the Japanese tea ceremony. And in the 14th century, during the Ming Dynasty, the Chinese emperor shifted the standard from tea pressed into cakes to loose-leaf tea. At that point, China still held a virtual monopoly on the world's tea trees, making tea one of 3 essential Chinese export goods, along with porcelain and silk. This gave China a great deal of power and economic influence as tea drinking spread around the world. That spread began in earnest around the early 1600s when Dutch traders brought tea to Europe in large quantities. Many credit Queen Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese noblewoman, for making tea popular with the English aristocracy when she married King Charles II in 1661. At the time, Great Britain was in the midst of expanding its colonial influence and becoming the new dominant world power. And as Great Britain grew, interest in tea spread around the world. By 1700, tea in Europe sold for 10 times the price of coffee, and the plant was still only grown in China. The tea trade was so lucrative that the world's fastest sailboat, the Clipper ship, was born out of intense competition between Western trading companies. All were racing to bring their tea back to Europe first to maximize their profits. At first, Britain paid for all this Chinese tea with silver. When that proved too expensive, they suggested trading tea for another substance, opium. This triggered a public health problem within China, as people became addicted to the drug. Then, in 1839, a Chinese official ordered his men to destroy massive British shipments of opium as a statement against Britain's influence over China. This act triggered the First Opium War between the two nations. Fighting raged up and down the Chinese coast until 1842, when the defeated Qing dynasty ceded the port of Hong Kong to the British and resumed trading on unfavorable terms. The war weakened China's global standing for over a century. The British East India Company also wanted to be able to grow tea themselves and further control the market. So they commissioned botanist Robert Fortune to steal tea from China in a covert operation. He disguised himself and took a perilous journey through China's mountainous tea regions, eventually smuggling tea trees and experienced tea workers into Darjeeling, India. From there, the plant spread further still, helping drive tea's rapid growth as an everyday commodity. Today, tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world, after water. And from sugary Turkish Riza tea to salty Tibetan butter tea, there are almost as many ways of preparing the beverage as there are cultures on the globe.
Corn currently accounts for more than 1/10 of our global crop production. The United States alone has enough cornfields to cover Germany. But while other crops we grow come in a range of varieties, over 99% of cultivated corn is the exact same type, Yellow Dent number 2. This means that humans grow more Yellow Dent number 2 than any other plant on the planet. So how did this single variety of this single plant become the biggest success story in agricultural history? Nearly 9,000 years ago, corn, also called maize, was first domesticated from teosinte, a grass native to Mesoamerica. Teosinte's rock-hard seeds were barely edible, but its fibrous husk could be turned into a versatile material. Over the next 4,700 years, farmers bred the plant into a staple crop with larger cobs and edible kernels. As maize spread throughout the Americas, it took on an important role, with multiple indigenous societies revering a corn mother as the goddess who created agriculture. When Europeans first arrived in America, they shunned the strange plant. Many even believed it was the source of physical and cultural differences between them and the Mesoamericans. However,